Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, LawVu's community for in-house legal professionals. LawVu's mission is to accelerate the evolution of the in-house legal profession, and with this podcast, we showcase modern legal leaders from across the globe. We explore their unique journeys and how they're driving the transformation of our new profession. Join David Lancelot, LawVu's Chief Legal Officer and Executive Vice President of Advocacy, as he explores the cutting edge of in-house legal leadership. This is the Legal Leaders Podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, David Lancelot, and I have the great pleasure to have with me today, Bjarne Tellmann, CEO and founder of Fjord Partners, advisors. Thank you, Bjarne, for joining us. As everybody hopefully knows, this is part 2 of my conversation with Bjarne. He's got a great new book coming out, and I'm really excited to talk to him about it. Bjarne, do you want to give us a quick update on the book for anybody who jumped in on this episode without listening to the first one?
Yeah, sure. And listen, thanks for having me back. I really appreciate the conversation last week and look forward to it today. Yeah, the name of the book is Law in the Era of AI, Clients, Firms, and the Future of the Legal Industry. And it's really centered around all the changes happening right now in the legal space. And it has as its central theme that disruption and change to the industry is going to emanate from the customer, from the client, particularly the corporate client, because that is where change is happening at an exponential pace. And that's going to have a knock-on effect, both in terms of how legal departments are structured and in terms of what they expect from law firms, alternative legal service providers, and other players in the space.
Right on. So back to our conversation from the last episode. You describe it in your new book, the idea of the AI factory, which I think is a fascinating concept, inside legal departments. What does that mean in practice?
Yeah, so the whole notion of the AI factory comes from 2 Harvard Business School professors, Marco Iansiti and Karim Lakhani, who wrote Competing in the Age of AI. Marco Iansiti was actually my professor at Harvard Business School, and that's where I got the idea from. His book was amazing. His class was incredible, and this was quite a few years ago now. But the fact that they foresaw this and really painted the picture was incredible. But the idea of the AI factory inside a company is, companies kind of evolve across 4 stages. If you look at stage 1, a pre-AI factory company, the data basically inside those companies are siloed across all of their subsidiaries. They can't communicate across those silos. The data is fundamentally analog, which basically means, if you want insights, they need to be manually extracted. So the CFO would have to manually extract financial performance data across the enterprise using Excel spreadsheets and so forth, just generate the reporting, right? And then you get to stage 2 where pilots begin to emerge, maybe in the finance function. You bring together the underlying data at the enterprise and the component libraries across the enterprise for, say, finance. Now you start to generate insights leveraging technology and AI in particular. So you really can not only instantaneously see what's happening, but you also see where the opportunities are, where your weaknesses are. That becomes very attractive. And then many companies move into stage 3, where they really try to do this enterprise-wide. That is a massive lift. But once you get to 3, you have incredible power, because now you have enterprise-wide data that's organized, tagged, filtered, sorted in ways that allow algorithms to mine that data and generate insights and use cases for humans. That is a fundamental shift in how the company is structured. Then you get to 4, which is about 20% of companies today are in stage 4. And stage 4, you have all of what was in 3, except now it's working 24/7. Many of the workflows and processes are automated. So humans really are not very prevalent other than at critical points in the loop. You have maybe stronger governance and guardrails around what those AI technologies can mine. And that's shifting now as well with the emergence of agents. So that's kind of the AI factory. It fundamentally transforms how companies operate. And then that has a knock-on effect for legal departments. And the book talks a little bit about what that looks like.
Right on. Yeah, yeah. And you're making me think of a conversation I had with Bill Deckelman recently, where he said somebody asked him, "Does AI make transformation easier or harder?" And he said, "Yes," which I thought was really great, because I mean, certainly what I've seen is there's a lot of excitement to move quickly to implement technologies, particularly internally, but everybody has the same issues, and I think your framework, as always, puts it in a great perspective, because we've spent so much time siloing legal in particular, and all the data and information that the legal has for various reasons, that it makes it very challenging for departments that don't spend the time to intake and structure and cleanse that information. It makes it very hard for them to take the next step to sort of stage 3 and stage 4 of your framework.
Yeah. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's quite a long tail on the legal side of that equation about what they should do, what they should be building as their companies move towards stage 4 AI factory status, right? And in my book, I sort of paint a picture of what the legal department in the AI era, in the GC 4.0 era, should look like. And it's a bit silly, but years ago, a secretary actually at Pearson came up with a brilliant catchphrase for it. She called it the gazelephant. And the idea is you want to construct a department that has a stable elephant-like back end. It's tech enabled and tech driven, with processes and guardrails, and an emergent gazelle-like front end that is nimble, fast moving, and able to service the business, and hence the birth of the gazelephant. But if you kind of step back and you say, well, what does that stack look like structurally? What an AI era legal department that's servicing, an AI factory will have a technology base, and that platform becomes really, really critical to the whole operating model of that legal department. And then sitting on top of that tech platform, you have an enabled, upskilled, and far more empowered legal operations team that consists of multidisciplinary capabilities that are enabling that tech at core. And they are strategic because they're making critical decisions around what that platform looks like. What are we investing in technology-wise? How are we correlating our investments with the strategic risk we face? And then how is that going to support the specialists and the generalists that sit above that tech platform? And that platform is pushing knowledge and insights up the chain, and also intaking data and insights that come back in. So it's continuously improving. And as that tech stack really develops further, you end up having strong demand from law firms and ALSPs to connect into that stack, to provide their structured data into that mix. And increasingly, agentic tools are taking a much bigger role in all of that. And the interesting thing about this model is, like the AI factories that it serves, the benefits of scale, scope, and learning begin to kick in as that model takes effect. So in the corporate environment, the AI factory can scale at close to zero marginal cost, meaning that every additional customer costs virtually nothing to serve, right? It can scope, meaning it can use its modular platform to sell books and cloud services and a million other things. And it can continuously learn. So the systems learn from every interaction and get better. And with every improvement, that provides greater quality, which means more customers, which means more data, which means better learning, et cetera. Now, in the legal space, you see that effect already beginning to kick out in companies that are sort of at the furthest end of the spectrum here. So on the scaling side, for example, JP Morgan, several years back now launched a system called Coin, which is a contract view system for loan agreements. That in the first year alone replaced 360,000 hours of human time. The system can process 12,000 loan agreements a second, and it saved JP Morgan $150 million in fraud losses in the first year alone, right? That's the scale effect in a legal department. Scoping, you have companies like Honeywell that are using their data in sort of a spherical way where they're pushing that data into the enterprise and mixing it with ESG data, with legal compliance data, et cetera, reducing contract cycle times, saving working capital, and just generating far greater efficiency and insights from the data that sits in the enterprise. And then continuous learning obviously happens with contract systems that improve, fraud systems that have, the ability to adapt to the latest fraud behavior, et cetera. So it's just one of those interesting things that you're going to start to see scale, scope, and learning effects that speed up delivery. And as that speed increases, guess what happens when they want to plug in with suppliers? You have agents triaging stuff automatically in SAP and Salesforce. And then the triage eventually finds its way to, gee, we need outside counsel. And then it gets to that side of the fence and it meets a human that needs to call a meeting to figure out who's got capacity to do this work. Where are we going to charge for it? And it's just not that's just not going to work. So that's where I can see the potential friction point.
Draft smarter, review faster, stay consistent. LawVu Draft puts AI to work for your legal team, so contracts don't slow you down. Start your 14-day trial now at lawvudraft.com.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, from an in-house perspective, I think there's a lot of really interesting considerations in terms of like, how do you structure your function? What does leadership mean? And what is the purpose of the function? And I think one of the biggest changes for me that I've been thinking about a lot lately is in terms of knowledge management. Knowledge management has sort of been less than top priority, let's say, for a lot of corporate legal teams. I mean, I've worked at big companies with big legal teams where it's sort of 10% of your job and nobody does it. I think
I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, one of the things that we'll speak about at your conference in May that I'll be attending in London, I think will be how do you create value? How do you accelerate performance in this environment? And I do think that governance is going to become a critical part. So I think what we're going to see in terms of the value shift is moving from a world where the value creation model is the general counsel as legal advisor, right? Responding to legal questions, managing external spend, reviewing documents, advising on compliance, protecting the organization. All of those things are critical, but no longer enough. Those become baseline. And the real value add is the GC as strategic governor, right? How do we govern autonomous AI systems that are operating in our enterprise? How do we orchestrate a fragmented legal ecosystem? How do we define the authority of agents, the limits of agents, right? And how do we enable that model, the operating model that gets developed inside the legal department that we just talked about? How do we enable that and at the same time contain it and create enterprise-wide value out of it with the speed and the scale that it has the potential to offer without, blowing up? And if I can recommend a great book, Kathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction, which it's got to be the best title out there. It's all about how these systems can go wrong at scale, right? You get it wrong in a really, really bad way. And that's
we've certainly seen some examples of that recently, right? Like I'm thinking of large e-commerce providers, you know, having Wikipedia articles that that their agentic systems were looking at before making decisions when the articles were out of date, which brought down their web services platform for hours and hours, which probably costs everybody around the world hundreds of millions of dollars. And it really, to me, it really emphasizes the huge shift in knowledge management is for sort of back office lawyers who couldn't make partner, to knowledge management is the most important thing that you can do to sort of feed the scalable engine room of your organization, right? And I think, you know, what you're talking about, Bjarne, I think, you know, for me, your first book was about like how the vision for legal leadership has to change and how you have to get people on board with it for change management, et cetera. And I think you've done it again now, right? Like when you're talking, I'm thinking, man, this is going to be a challenging vision to inspire legal professionals and across everybody who works in legal, right? Not just lawyers, but legal professionals to stand up and say, we need to move in this direction, particularly when they're coming from environments like law firms and legal education, where they haven't even gotten on board with the vision from 2017.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. On the other hand, I think that as companies evolve, it just sort of becomes, it becomes a natural part of meeting the demand of your clients, right? If your clients are,
It's a must do rather than a choice.
yeah. And by the way, it's not just the general counsel and legal department that's going to be responsible for these things, right? It will be a shared accountability across the company. But I think that the legal department, as let's say the guardian of the business, has a big role to play in helping to shape that, to determine, interpret the rules to the extent there are rules. I mean, one of the challenges that we face right now is that we live in an environment where where business models are rising and falling faster than the rules can catch up with them. Right? Whole models can come and go before
the rules are even written.
Iteration of the AI Act gets enacted and promulgated, and whatever else needs to happen, and that means judgment becomes a key part of the role. So you have these technical things that you need to do around governance and frameworks, but you also have judgment, as always, with lawyers and with GCs. How do they exercise that judgment in an uncertain world where the rules aren't clear? So in some ways, it's a continuation. In other ways, it's quite radical and revolutionary and groundbreaking in terms of what it requires.
Yeah, and it makes me think of the situation where you draft and sort of promulgate a policy, and in the old world, the current world, maybe your understanding is a few people might read this. I hope we manage to get the company on board with it. Moving from that model to this policy will now drive the engine that answers all the questions for the business, almost all of them, right? The large percentage of them, in a sort of real time, meeting the customer where they are model.
Yeah.
So that policy actually now becomes sort of like the lifeblood, the culture of the business. So you actually have to have far more judgment and thoughtfulness about it than you did in the past.
Absolutely. And you can see how the risk rises when your technology starts communicating with external partners, right?
Yep.
Or when it starts creating legal commitments, or accessing sensitive data, or triggering various workflows or financial or operational actions.
Yep.
And the scale of devastation that can be unleashed is potentially massive. So you have this tension between incredible productivity, on the one hand, and on the other hand, incredible devastation. And so I think that means the remit and the accountability that GCs in this world, that we're entering, will have grows, right? So there's going to be a piece around, defining when, let's say, agent generated content is a legal communication, right? That requires human sign off, right? So how and when can it communicate with counterparties? There's going to be a piece around regulatory and legal advice and ensuring that agent behavior and AI behavior complies with anti-bribery rules, with data protection and other rules, right? There's going to be a piece around delegations of authority. What actions can agents take on and bind the organization from without, and where are the defined bands? Where does that authority go? Privilege. How do we ensure that documents that are privileged get handled in the right way? Confidentiality, the oversight of these systems and the governance around that you mentioned, and then also just how do we preserve, if we kind of come back to inside the legal function, how do we preserve capabilities and skills in a world where lawyers aren't coming up through the ranks and doing all the things that you and I did when we were baby lawyers? If none of that is present anymore, and technology is lifting a lot of those activities, how do we make sure that those people are thoroughly trained?
Yep. Yeah. So I know we've touched a great deal on the disruption in the traditional law firm model. And I think we all agree, everybody would agree that is going to get heavily disrupted. Do you have any thoughts about how the legal education model, which you just touched upon, would be disrupted? Because I can imagine there are plenty.
Yeah. I mean, legal education could be a whole book in itself. The model that we currently have, as I mentioned earlier, came out of the early 1900s, where you had Christopher Columbus Langdell at Harvard had kind of created the modern law school, with the emphasis really being focused on teaching people to think like lawyers, right? With the case method and Socratic method case, so really kind of creating an environment where you train people cognitively to think like lawyers, but not really partaking in sort of teaching people how to be lawyers. And that was left to the other side of that equation, the law firm, this Cravath model law firm, which then would take all these smart people who had learned how to think like lawyers and teach them actually how to be lawyers in an apprenticeship structured kind of a way, where they disaggregated the value chain and parsed out pieces, commensurate with your experience. And then over time, you acquired more skills, et cetera. That whole model is coming apart. And it worked really well for a while, where law school could just indulge themselves on focusing on that life of the mind and leave all the dirty work to firms. For a whole bunch of reasons we probably don't have time to go into, the model is coming apart. And I think, law schools need to rethink their purpose. I think really, why do we exist? What are we actually here to do? And if you end up concluding, well, we're here to train people to be excellent lawyers, then we need to start thinking about, in the book, I have sort of a triangle, with time, with content, and with methodology, with purpose at the center of that triangle. And, time, in US schools, there's 3 years. How are we spending those 3 years? And what part of that educational cycle do we think there may be some slack? I would argue the third year definitely has an opportunity to be structured in a more comprehensive and methodical way. And then, the content. So what are we teaching people? Don't we need to, clinics have risen in importance, both in the UK and the US, and I think that's really good. But we need even more structure around the skills we're teaching, including new skills like, technology, design thinking, leadership and team, collaboration. So all of these new skills are needed. And by the way, I also think lawyers need business skills. They need to be able to read a balance sheet and a P&L and understand what cash flow is. Some of those basics are not there when lawyers come out into the world. And then methodology, what methods? The Socratic method has its place, and I think it can be very powerful, as do case studies. But, many of the cases we use are snippets of cases from the medieval era or, from the 1800s. And couldn't we do what business schools do, which is provide a case that is relevant to the 21st century with an actual situation involving actual human beings alive today arrest you, right? And then just stop the clock and say, what do you think they should do? How should the judges, consider this issue? So I think it all do an upgrade and holistically along those lines. Whether that will happen is a different question.
Yeah. And an enormous amount of institutional inertia, both in law firm, external counsel sort of business models and practice, as well as legal education. And you and I have spoken about this many times, but how do you see things playing out for those organizations that don't at least try and make this transformation? How does the innovator's dilemma affect everyone who doesn't realize they're in the innovator's dilemma?
And you're thinking now organizations in the law firms, schools, ALSPs, or just sort of generally?
Yes. Law firms, ALSPs, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that the data and the history and the theory from almost every other industry speaks the story better than I'll be able to guess. But fundamentally, if you fail to adapt and you dismiss the changes that are starting and happening at the periphery, and you just let them gradually improve until they suddenly redefine the market, I think you will find yourself struggling in a shifting landscape with a model that is no longer fit for purpose, right? That is the lesson of history, the lesson of many companies. And it happens again and again and again across every industry. I don't think legal is immune. There are certain features that have made it particularly sticky, but I think as client expectations meet changing technologies, you're going to have, at some point, there's going to be an inflection point where new capabilities revolutionize not only how work is done, but also what clients perceive as needed, right? The horse and buggy is great, and you can make faster and faster horse and buggies, and that's what everyone wants until they suddenly see, a Ferrari, and then they say, I want that. I don't want a horse and buggy. I don't care how fast it goes. And that's kind of the world we're in, where we leap from horse and buggies to Ferraris. It's not an incremental shift. So, at some point, these changes that are all brewing on the periphery are going to become good enough, and they're going to offer new and different ways of doing things. So if you think about, Nokia in 2007, world's best maker of cell phones, hand phones, right? Headsets, beautiful handsets. I still remember them with the shell, you could open it like a shell. So it's not that they weren't making great handsets, but 2007 was also when the iPhone launched, and it was criticized. It's a premium product. It doesn't have a keyboard. It doesn't really compete in terms of its capabilities as a handset to Nokia's product. But what they underestimated and maybe missed altogether was it wasn't about the headset anymore. It was about the App Store. It was about all the other capabilities that iOS brought with it. I can now take a picture of myself at a restaurant and upload it to Instagram immediately. That's suddenly a new job to be done that didn't exist. And now customers say, I don't care how great the handset is. I want something that can do that, which requires way more than the handset. It requires a whole system, an app system and an environment and a technology system behind it that flipped the whole thing. That is just, I think, a great example of how things can suddenly shift. And by the way, 5 years later, Nokia was out of the cell phone business, right? It sold it to Microsoft. So that's how fast these things can go. Yeah, but at some point, something's going to come along and, demand will meet supply in a way that is enabled by technology, and will shift things.
Yeah. And I think there's probably not enough, even I, who, I work in legal technology with a pretty long career in legal leadership in-house. And even I see that there's relatively few really cutting edge in-house legal teams, but they're there. the model is there. It's happening now. And I imagine that the law firms aren't seeing that, if only we are. So I think what you're doing is bringing that knowledge to them and to the rest of the legal ecosystem with just enough time for them to try and make that transformation.
Yeah.
Uh,
And there's a good thing is that there are things they can do. And there are some firms that are doing amazing things. And I'm working with some of them. I think some of them are absolutely enlightened. They get this. They're learning from their experiments. And that's exactly what you should do. And I think you're also right on the in-house side. There is a very long tail of legal departments that really have no idea how to get their hands around this and haven't even started. So, we're at the beginning of something, but the thing is it can move more quickly than, it took 30 years for electricity to electrify all factories in the United States. I don't think it's going to take 30 years this time.
No, agreed completely. Well, as always, Bjarne, a tremendously impactful conversation. I very much appreciate you joining us on the Legal Leaders podcast today, and I will see you soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.